Hello, everyone. It's great to have you back for another spine-chilling video here on Phantom Files, where we dive deep into the most unsettling, mysterious, and downright terrifying tales out there. If you're new here, a warm welcome. Consider hitting that subscribe button to join our ever-growing community of curiosity seekers and thrill lovers. Today's video is all about true unsettling stories that will make you question the safety of your surroundings and keep you on the edge of your seat. These aren't just stories. They're chilling accounts shared by people who claim to have experienced these events firsthand. Whether you believe in the supernatural or think these tales are rooted in reality, one thing is certain: they're guaranteed to haunt your thoughts. Before we dive in, let me take a moment to thank all of you for your incredible support. This channel has grown because of viewers like you, and we're on a mission to hit 250,000 subscribers by the end of the year. With your help, we can make it happen. So if you enjoy this video, don't forget to like, comment, and share it with your fellow thrill seekers. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and prepare yourself for some of the most unsettling stories you've ever heard. Let's get started with the first tale. Imagine this: you're at home, the one place where you're supposed to feel safe and secure. The day winds down, and you go through your usual routine: dinner, some TV or a book, maybe a warm drink before bed. It's a ritual, a comforting rhythm that lulls you into a sense of normalcy. But what if that safety was just an illusion? What if the sanctuary of your home was not as impenetrable as you believed? What if you weren't truly alone? Our first story unravels this horrifying possibility. It starts innocently enough: rustling noises coming from the attic, soft enough to be dismissed as the wind or perhaps a bird trapped up there. After all, these are sounds we've all heard at some point and brushed off without a second thought. But what happens when those noises don't stop? When they grow louder, more distinct? Footsteps that seem too deliberate to be a random animal, faint whispers at odd hours, or objects slightly out of place? And then, the realization: someone else might be in the house. This unsettling story comes from a person who began to notice subtle signs of intrusion. At first, it was easy to explain away: a forgotten door left ajar, a misplaced item, food disappearing faster than expected. But as time passed, the signs became harder to ignore. The attic hatch seemed to shift ever so slightly. Small piles of dust appeared under it, as if it had been disturbed. Lights were left on that were previously off. Even the family dog started acting strangely, sniffing the air and barking at seemingly nothing, its eyes fixed on the ceiling. What makes this story truly chilling isn't just the possibility of a stranger living undetected in the attic, it's the psychological toll it takes. You begin to question yourself: am I imagining this? Is it paranoia? But when the noises coincide with your movements, and the incidents grow too numerous to dismiss, a terrifying thought creeps in: they've been here all along. This person's experience came to a head one night when they decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight and shaky courage, they opened the attic hatch, their heart pounding in their chest. What they found, or didn't find, might surprise you. There was no one up there, no immediate evidence of another presence. But the psychological scars were already etched. Knowing that someone could infiltrate their life so intimately left them feeling exposed, vulnerable, and haunted by questions they might never get answers to. What's scarier than ghosts or paranormal entities? The idea that someone could be living in your home, watching you as you sleep, breathing the same air, sharing the same space, completely undetected. It's a fear that lingers long after the story ends. And it leaves us with a pressing question: how well do we really know our surroundings? As you listen to the next stories, keep in mind that sometimes the most terrifying things aren't supernatural. Sometimes they're human. And they're closer than you think. Imagine returning home after a pleasant day out, your mind still relaxed from the peaceful hours spent away. You open the door, greeted by the familiar sights and smells of your living space. Everything seems just as you left it, until you notice the subtle, unsettling differences. A door that should have been open is closed. Lights left off are now on. The food in your fridge seems to have dwindled, even though you were sure of what was there before you left. For one individual, This unsettling series of discoveries marked the beginning of an experience that would turn their sense of security upside down. It began with these small, seemingly inconsequential details. Initially dismissed as forgetfulness or coincidences, the oddities piled up, creating a creeping sense of unease. The once familiar home started to feel foreign, as though it belonged to someone, or something, else. One particularly chilling detail was the realization that their pets seemed to sense something amiss. Dogs, known for their acute senses, began to sniff and growl at areas of the house they had never paid attention to before. Their behavior turned erratic, their instincts seemingly tuned into an unseen presence. What were they sensing that the human eye couldn't perceive? Determined to get to the bottom of these disturbances, the homeowner devised a simple test. They pretended to leave the house, slamming the door to signal their departure. Instead of driving away, they doubled back, sneaking silently into their own living room. What followed confirmed their deepest fears: faint noises coming from the attic, the soft sound of movement as though someone, or something, was shifting around above them. The realization that someone might be secretly living in their home is a fear that strikes at the core of human vulnerability. It challenges the very foundation of safety and privacy. Yet the terror doesn't end there. As they stood frozen, trying to make sense of the sounds above, an overwhelming sense of dread consumed them. What would they do if they confronted whoever, or whatever, was up there? What were their intentions? The psychological weight of the unknown can be more horrifying than any tangible threat. This story serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes, the most terrifying things aren't monsters under the bed or spirits in the shadows. They're the silent, unseen watchers that invade our spaces, leaving us to grapple with the lingering question: are we ever truly alone? And for the unfortunate protagonist of this tale, the answer was a resounding no. Picture this: a quiet evening alone at home, the hum of appliances filling the otherwise still air. The solitude is a welcome change, a chance to relax and enjoy the quiet after a day of distractions. But solitude, while comforting at first, can sometimes take a sinister turn, especially when the house begins to feel different. For one individual, a night alone in a familiar home turned into an experience that would haunt them for years. Their father had left for a brief holiday, entrusting them with the house and their 2 dogs. At first, the silence was soothing. Meals were cooked, the dogs were pampered, and the days passed without much event. However, as the nights unfolded, subtle signs began to emerge, signs that hinted they were not alone. It started small, as these things often do. Food disappeared from the refrigerator, though they were sure it hadn't been eaten. The meticulously closed doors of their home were found ajar, lights left off were mysteriously turned on. At first, they reasoned these anomalies away. Maybe they had forgotten to turn off the lights. Maybe their dogs had somehow nudged open the doors. The human brain is adept at rationalizing the irrational. But then came the moment that shattered the illusion of safety. One night, while they were upstairs in their bedroom, the dogs began to act strangely. Normally calm and well-behaved, they started sniffing at the base of the attic ladder, growling low in their throats. Their hackles raised, and their usually wagging tails stiffened. Something above had captured their attention. At first, it seemed impossible. How could anything be in the attic? It was a locked, dusty space filled with forgotten holiday decorations and old belongings. Brushing aside the growing unease, they decided to ignore it. But the dogs wouldn't relent. Their growling turned to barking, a low, guttural sound that made the hair on the back of their necks stand on end. The next night, the noises started. Faint at first, scratching, creaking, and the occasional muffled thud. It could have been animals, they reasoned, perhaps a raccoon or a bird trapped in the attic. But the sounds were too deliberate, too human. When footsteps echoed directly overhead, the truth became undeniable. They were not alone. Fearing for their safety, they called a trusted friend to stay the night. The 2 devised a plan: pretend to leave the house, then sneak back in and see if anything emerged. They crept into the living room, sitting in silence, their ears straining to catch even the faintest sound. Minutes passed like hours, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. And then it came, a soft, almost hesitant scratch from the attic. The latch jiggled, as though someone, or something, was testing it. The sound froze them in place. The friend stomped his foot, a desperate attempt to intimidate whatever was lurking above. The noises stopped immediately. That was enough. They packed their bags, grabbed the dogs, and fled to the safety of the friend's home. When they returned the next day, the house told its own story. Dirty dishes had been left in the sink, food was missing from the refrigerator, and the attic latch showed signs of tampering. Someone had been there, living above them, just a thin ceiling away. The police were called, but the investigation yielded little. No intruder was found, and though the attic bore signs of recent occupation, there was no concrete evidence to tie it to anyone. Days turned into weeks, and eventually, the unsettling occurrences ceased. The house returned to its former quiet, but the memory of those nights never faded. This story is a chilling reminder of how thin the veil of safety can be. For one person, their sanctuary was violated in the most unsettling way, not by a ghost, not by a monster, but by the very real, very human threat of an unseen intruder. It raises the question that lingers in the back of every homeowner's mind: how well do we truly know the spaces we call home? Imagine the comfort of a night in, surrounded by family, in the safety of your home. The sounds of laughter echo through the living room, the warm glow of lamps bathes the walls, and the day's worries seem a million miles away. But what happens when that comfort is suddenly shattered by the arrival of an unexpected danger? This is precisely what happened to a pair of cousins, Cole and Hunter, along with their younger cousin, during what should have been an ordinary Friday night. Their parents were away, tending to a family emergency, leaving Hunter, at 15, in charge. The trio planned for a quiet evening, pizza, games, and staying up late chatting. The evening began uneventfully. They indulged in pizza and light-hearted jokes, laughing about school, sports, and the typical teenage antics. But as the night settled in, the unexpected came knocking, literally. Around 9 p.m., a sharp knock echoed through the house. Cole went to answer the door, curious about who might be visiting so late. Standing on the porch were two unfamiliar men. They claimed to be from the city, investigating reports of low water pressure in the neighborhood. Their demeanor was polite, but there was something about their questions that felt off. "Are your parents home?" one of them asked, their tone casual, almost too casual. Cole hesitated before replying. "No, they're not available right now." It was the standard answer they'd been taught to give strangers. But the men didn't leave. Instead, they pressed on, asking more questions about the house and its water system. That's when Hunter stepped in. He approached the door with a calm confidence that belied his years. "The water pressure here is fine," he said firmly. "You should check the other houses." His tone left no room for argument. Slowly, reluctantly, the men turned and walked away, their gazes lingering just a bit too long as Hunter closed the door. The boys tried to brush off the encounter, chalking it up to overzealous utility workers. They returned to their games and laughter, but the atmosphere in the house had shifted. A sense of unease lingered, subtle but undeniable. As the hours passed and bedtime approached, they decided it was safer to stay together in one room. Hunter set up a sleeping bag for their younger cousin, while he and Cole climbed into their respective beds. They left the lights dimmed, whispering about the strange visitors until sleep finally claimed them. But the night had more in store. In the early hours of the morning, the youngest cousin woke up, needing to use the bathroom. As he walked back to the bedroom, he heard a noise, a faint shuffling sound coming from the family room. He froze, listening. It was too deliberate to be the creaks of the house settling. Someone was there. Heart pounding, he hurried back to the bedroom and woke Hunter and Cole. Together, the three crept towards the family room, their fear mounting with every step. What they found was the stuff of nightmares. The two men from earlier were inside the house, rummaging through their belongings. One of the intruders noticed them first. He locked eyes with the boys and, without a word, began advancing towards them, pulling a knife from his pocket. Panic set in. They turned and bolted for the front door, Hunter leading the way. By some miracle, the door was unlocked, and they burst outside, barefoot and terrified. Luck was on their side. A police car happened to be patrolling the neighborhood. They waved it down, shouting about the men in the house. The officers acted swiftly, calling for backup. Within minutes, the house was surrounded, and the intruders were apprehended. It turned out they had gained entry through a broken window latch in the laundry room. Their plan had been to rob the house, likely targeting it because they had realized no adults were present. The ordeal didn't end there. As the police searched the house, neighbors began gathering outside, drawn by the commotion. Among them were classmates from school, watching with wide eyes as the boys stood outside, still in their pajamas, or, in this case, their underwear. It was an embarrassing detail that would haunt them at school for weeks to come, adding insult to injury. Though no one was physically harmed, the emotional scars ran deep. The boys had come face to face with a very real danger, learning a lesson they would never forget. Even the most familiar places can harbor unexpected threats. This story reminds us of the importance of vigilance and quick thinking in the face of danger. It's a testament to the resilience of youth and the bond of family, even in the most unsettling of circumstances. And perhaps, it's a reminder to always double-check your locks before turning in for the night. It was a serene, sunny weekend on the plains, a perfect time for a family visit. The narrator, excited to introduce their girlfriend to their mother for the first time, made the trip to a remote family home. Nestled on 40 acres of expansive land, the house was a peaceful haven, far removed from the chaos of city life. Little did they know that this idyllic setting would soon be overshadowed by an event that defied all understanding. The visit began with warm greetings and familiar faces. The narrator's brother and his wife were also there, making it a small family gathering. Dogs bounded around the yard, tails wagging with joy. All except for one, the loud and lively beagle. The absence of the beagle wasn't immediately alarming. After all, it wasn't uncommon for the dogs to wander the property. Still, the narrator's mother mentioned that the beagle had darted out the previous night and hadn't returned. The day passed in calm and quiet. They enjoyed the fresh air, shared meals, and exchanged stories. But a strange detail nagged at their attention, a hawk circling persistently over the same spot in the field. Hours went by, and the bird remained. Finally, curiosity got the better of them. The narrator's brother and his wife decided to investigate while the others stayed back. When they returned, their faces were pale, their expressions grim. "You need to see this," the brother said, his voice heavy with something that wasn't quite fear but wasn't far from it either. The narrator followed them into the field, each step marked by a growing sense of unease. The sight that awaited them was unlike anything they had ever seen. The beagle lay motionless in the grass, but something was horribly wrong. Its body was not simply lifeless, it had been skinned with surgical precision. The horror deepened as they examined the scene. The surrounding grass was flattened, as though a struggle had taken place. The edges of the dog's fur were cleanly severed, leaving only the head, tail, and paws intact. It wasn't the work of predators. This was deliberate, calculated. Someone had done this. The family was in shock. Who could commit such an atrocity, and why? The realization that this had occurred just a few hundred feet from their front door was chilling. That night, while they slept, someone had trespassed on their land, taken the family dog, and performed this heinous act. The police were called, arriving after what felt like an eternity. They surveyed the scene, took photographs, and asked questions. Yet, their investigation offered little in the way of answers. The only clues were faint tire tracks in the distance, and a pile of fresh horse manure nearby. Had the perpetrator arrived on horseback? Was this a calculated act, or something more sinister? The family was left with more questions than answers. Cameras were installed, fences were repaired, and everyone grew more vigilant. But the memory of that day lingered, a dark stain on the fabric of their once tranquil home. Years later, the narrators still can't bring themselves to delete the photos of that day. The images serve as a grim reminder of the unknown, a haunting testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest horrors are not born of the supernatural, but of human cruelty. This story isn't just unsettling, it's a sobering reflection on the fragile boundary between safety and vulnerability. It's a reminder that even in the most peaceful settings, the unexpected can strike, leaving us questioning the world around us and the motives of those who inhabit it. The narrator's story begins as an escape, an attempt to find solace in the solitude of their family's remote cabin near Mount Bachelor, Oregon. Recently having inherited money and a car after the tragic loss of their father, they sought peace amidst towering pines and the quiet of the wilderness. Accompanied only by their dog, Midnight, the narrator planned to spend a week snowboarding, playing games, and savoring the tranquility of nature. The first 2 days were uneventful, filled with the comforting rhythm of routine. But on the third day, a sense of unease crept into their secluded retreat. It started subtly, footprints in the snow surrounding the cabin. At first, they dismissed the tracks as those of a passing hiker or animal. But as the hours wore on, the unnerving details piled up. That night, Midnight's behavior changed. Normally a playful and obedient companion, the dog became restless and agitated. His ears perked up at the slightest noise, and he barked at shadows that weren't there. Midnight's attention repeatedly turned to the roof of the cabin. The narrator, though skeptical, couldn't ignore the mounting tension. Later, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from above. Hooves? The deliberate pacing didn't belong to an animal. It was too measured, too human. Gathering their courage, the narrator stepped out onto the balcony to investigate. Armed with a flashlight and a cigarette, they scanned the snowy roof, finding nothing disturbed. But as their eyes adjusted to the darkness, something caught their attention, a figure crouched in a nearby tree. It was humanoid, perched between branches with an unsettling grace. Its elongated limbs clutched the tree, and it remained perfectly still, as though observing its prey. Midnight growled softly, pacing behind the narrator. The creature didn't move, its silhouette blending with the surrounding darkness. The narrator's instincts screamed to retreat, and they heeded the internal warning, locking the balcony door and retreating to bed. The tapping began soon after. Gentle yet insistent, it came from the balcony door. Midnight stared at the glass, his body tense, as if sensing something the narrator couldn't see. The tapping continued for what felt like hours, a rhythmic invitation to look, to engage, to open the door. Despite the fear that gripped them, the narrator resisted. The following days passed in tense quiet. The creature did not return, or if it did, it left no sign. The narrator completed their stay, haunted but unharmed, and the cabin was sold shortly after. Yet the memory of that night lingered, a chilling encounter with something that defied explanation. The narrator later learned of legends surrounding skinwalkers, malevolent entities known to shape-shift and mimic human forms. While rational explanations might point to a human intruder or a trick of the mind, the narrator couldn't shake the feeling that what they encountered was something far beyond the natural world. This experience left an indelible mark. Even now, the narrator sleeps with nightlights and flashlights at hand, a silent acknowledgement of the unknown that lurks beyond the veil of reason. Whether a figment of imagination or a true encounter with the supernatural, the story serves as a chilling reminder of how fragile our sense of safety can be, especially in the stillness of the wilderness. The narrator recalls a chilling memory from when they were just 10 years old, living in a warm climate where they loved to keep their windows open during winter to let the crisp air in. It was a quiet night, and the house felt still. The only others home were the narrator's 2 nannies, watching TV in a distant part of the house. After showering and preparing for bed, the narrator turned off their bedroom light. The room fell into darkness, save for the faint glow from the outside walkway. As they lay down, a sense of unease washed over them. Something didn't feel right. The window, open to the cold night air, suddenly became a portal to something sinister. And then they saw him. A man's face was pressed against the mesh screen of the window, his features distorted by the barrier but unmistakably clear. He was motionless, his gaze piercing and unrelenting. What stood out the most was his twisted smile, a grin that exuded malice and a deep, unnerving intent. His face seemed almost animalistic, covered in coarse hair that blended seamlessly with his unkempt head of hair. The narrator froze, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. Was it a trick of the light? A shadow cast by the moon? To confirm their fears, they cautiously stepped closer to the window. the figure remained. He didn't move, didn't flinch, but continued to watch with a predatory intensity. In a panic, the narrator bolted out of the room and raced down the hall to where the nannies were. Desperation filled their voice as they tried to explain what they'd seen, but the nannies dismissed the story, chalking it up to the narrator's overactive imagination. The narrator begged them to investigate, and finally, they relented. Together, they returned to the bedroom, but the man was gone. The window screen appeared untouched, and there was no sign of an intruder. The nannies, skeptical, told the narrator it must have been a dream or a figment of their imagination. But the narrator knew what they saw. They couldn't shake the image of the man's eyes, and that grotesque smile burned into their memory. For days afterward, the narrator refused to sleep in their room. The sense of violation, of being watched so intimately, haunted them. Questions lingered. How long had he been there? Had he seen them undressing after their shower? What were his intentions? Though the man never returned, the experience left an indelible scar. It wasn't just the fear of the encounter itself, but the realization of how easily someone could breach the fragile barrier of safety they had taken for granted. To this day, the narrator avoids keeping windows open at night, no matter how cool or inviting the air may be. The man outside the window, with his unnerving stillness and sinister grin, remains a mystery. Whether a transient predator or something otherworldly, his presence lingers in the narrator's memory, a chilling reminder of the horrors that can lurk just beyond the glass. The narrator recounts an ongoing, inexplicable series of events that began with subtle signs but soon escalated into something far more sinister. Living alone with their father in an older, creaky house, they initially dismissed strange noises as the product of their imagination or the natural sounds of an aging home. However, what unfolded over the following months left them questioning their safety and reality. It began innocently enough, rustling sounds in the attic, most often heard early in the morning or late at night. The narrator assumed a bird or small animal had found its way into the house, a common occurrence in their area. Their father, ever the logical skeptic, reassured them there was nothing to worry about. For weeks, the sounds persisted but remained harmless. One night, everything changed. The narrator awoke in the middle of the night, startled by the distinct sound of footsteps above their room. These weren't the light scurrying of an animal but deliberate, human-like steps moving across the attic floor. Heart pounding, they ran to their father's room, only to be met with disbelief. Their father chalked it up to the narrator's occasional auditory hallucinations, a symptom of their known mental health struggles. Seeking comfort, the narrator convinced themselves it was all in their mind. But the noises didn't stop. If anything, they grew more frequent and unsettling. Strange occurrences began to pile up, doors left ajar that had been closed, food missing from the refrigerator, and their computer inexplicably turned on and left on unfamiliar websites. Each event could be logically explained, but the combination created a growing sense of unease. Things escalated further when the narrator, home alone for the holidays, noticed a pattern. Food from the fridge began disappearing faster than expected, and their dogs started acting strangely, sniffing and growling at the attic hatch. One night, the narrator and a visiting friend staged an experiment. They pretended to leave the house and waited in silence. To their horror, they heard scratching and movement near the attic hatch, confirming their worst fears: someone or something was up there. Frightened, the narrator and their friend left the house for the night. When they returned the next day, more food was gone, and the kitchen sink contained dirty dishes that hadn't been there before. Terrified, they called the police, who searched the house but found no intruder. Their investigation ended with a shrug, leaving the narrator feeling more vulnerable than ever. The breaking point came when a neighbor revealed they had seen two individuals jumping over the backyard fence while the narrator was away. Though the house had since been quiet, the thought of people living secretly in their attic, mere feet from where they slept, left a lingering sense of dread. To this day, the narrator remains haunted by the experience. They no longer feel safe in their own home and can't shake the fear of what might have happened if they had confronted the intruders. It's a chilling reminder that sometimes, the most terrifying dangers are not paranormal but human, and closer than we ever imagined. The narrator recounts an unnerving experience that took place in the solitude of a remote family cabin surrounded by dense woods. Seeking refuge after a personal tragedy, they planned a week-long getaway with their dog, Midnight, to snowboard, relax, and process their grief. However, the peaceful retreat turned into a nightmare when they encountered something that defied explanation. The first 2 days passed uneventfully, filled with snowboarding, playing with Midnight, and enjoying the isolation. The cabin, though outdated, was cozy and familiar, offering a sense of comfort. But everything changed on the third day. It started with the discovery of footprints in the snow around the cabin. The tracks appeared human but led into the dense forest, where they vanished. The narrator dismissed the incident, assuming it was the mark of a hiker or a local. That night, the peaceful ambience gave way to something sinister. Lying in bed, the narrator was startled by the sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps on the roof. Midnight, usually calm, began pacing and barking at the balcony door. Determined to investigate, the narrator stepped onto the balcony with a flashlight and cigarette in hand. As their eyes adjusted to the darkness, they noticed something that froze them in place. Perched in a nearby tree, roughly 20 feet away, was a figure. It was humanoid, crouching on a branch with its arms stretched above its head, gripping another branch for balance. The silhouette was eerily still, as though it was aware of being observed. Midnight growled, his unease mirroring the narrator's rising terror. Unable to look away, the narrator retreated inside, locking the balcony door behind them. They resisted the urge to shine their flashlight at the figure, an instinct that screamed self-preservation. Through the curtains, they stayed awake, heart pounding, until exhaustion claimed them. Later that night, the tension escalated further. A persistent tapping sound echoed from the balcony door, as if someone, or something, was trying to lure them outside. Midnight refused to approach the door, his eyes fixed on it with unwavering intensity. The narrator, paralyzed by fear, stayed in bed, repeating prayers and clutching the blanket until sleep eventually overtook them. The following morning brought daylight and a false sense of security. Despite the calm, the narrator couldn't shake the eerie memory of the figure in the tree. The remainder of their stay was uneventful, but the encounter left an indelible mark. To this day, the narrator remains haunted by the experience. Was it an overactive imagination fueled by grief, or did they truly encounter something otherworldly? The figure in the tree, its unnerving stillness and unnatural behavior, remains a terrifying mystery, a stark reminder of the unknown lurking just beyond the veil of the ordinary. This unsettling story takes us into the mind of a 9-year-old child living with their family in their grandmother's eerie, shrine-filled home. The grandmother, a deeply spiritual and devout woman, surrounded the household with a blend of Catholic and Hindu artifacts, creating an atmosphere of both reverence and unease. Among these shrines and symbols, the narrator began experiencing a strange and intrusive phenomenon, pervasive thoughts about the devil. The child's fascination with the occult, fueled by glimpses into their aunt's witchcraft books, mingled with a growing sense of dread. Though they were young, the narrator recognized that the thoughts invading their mind were unnatural, as though they weren't entirely their own. This backdrop of unease was intensified by the ominous presence of their aunt's open closet, which seemed to emanate a suffocating, dark energy. One night, the child had an experience that blurred the line between dream and reality. In their dream, they woke up in bed and saw their mother lying nearby. Overwhelmed by dread, they reached out and told her, "Mommy, I've been thinking about the devil a lot." Blood began to pour from their nose, ears, and eyes as they spoke, but their mother seemed unfazed, laying back down as if nothing was amiss. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted, and the narrator was paralyzed as a small, white figure appeared on top of them. Its inhuman weight pressed down on their chest, and its long fingers wrapped around their throat, choking them. They struggled to move but couldn't, their fear reaching a fever pitch as the creature growled and hissed in their face. The sensation was so vivid and prolonged that it felt like an eternity. When the narrator finally woke up, gasping for air, they were back in their grandmother's room. The oppressive energy near the closet was palpable, as if something malevolent was watching them from the shadows. Terrified, they began reciting Hail Marys until exhaustion lulled them to sleep. The next day, The child tentatively approached the closet, still shaken by the previous night's events. Though nothing was visibly amiss, the feeling of being watched lingered. This experience marked a turning point for the narrator, cementing a lifelong awareness of unseen forces and leaving them to question the true nature of the malevolent presence they encountered. Even years later, the memory remains vivid, a chilling reminder that some fears are more than just the product of an overactive imagination. Whether psychological or supernatural, the darkness they faced in their grandmother's home left an indelible scar, one that time has yet to erase. One cold winter night, a 10-year-old found themselves alone in their room, enjoying the crisp night air through an open window. With the house quiet and the nannies engrossed in television at the far end of the home, the child began their nightly routine, unaware that the evening was about to turn into a harrowing experience. After showering, the child prepared for bed, feeling an unusual sense of unease. The window, which overlooked a brick-paved pathway leading to the front door, had always been a source of comfort, providing a view of the tranquil night. But as the lights were switched off and the room was plunged into darkness, the familiar view transformed into a scene of pure terror. A face appeared at the window. The man's visage was pressed against the screen, his unblinking eyes locked onto the child with a gaze that penetrated the soul. His smile was unnaturally wide, stretching his facial features into a grotesque mask of menace. His face appeared covered in an almost animalistic layer of hair, blending with the shadows of the night. For a moment, the child doubted their own senses, questioning if it was merely a trick of the foliage outside. But as the man remained motionless, the horrifying truth sank in: someone was there. Overwhelmed by fear, the child bolted from the room, racing down the long, narrow hallway that led to where the nannies were. The house's large windows, lining the path, offered a terrifying possibility of more figures lurking outside. Yet, driven by adrenaline, the child reached the safety of the nanny's room and urgently relayed what they had seen. Initially dismissive, the nannies eventually agreed to investigate. By the time they arrived at the child's room, the man was gone, leaving no trace behind. The screen on the window was undisturbed, and the area outside appeared untouched. The nannies, still skeptical, returned to their show, leaving the child alone with the unresolved fear of what had just transpired. That night, sleep was an impossibility. The child couldn't shake the image of the man's unnerving smile and the thought that he might still be out there, watching. The experience left a lasting scar, introducing a new, chilling understanding of vulnerability and the supposed safety of one's home. To this day, the memory lingers, a haunting reminder of the unknown horrors that can materialize just outside a windowpane. In a seemingly idyllic and affluent neighborhood, unease began to creep in as strange and unsettling events were reported by residents. For 17-year-old Alex, the neighborhood had always been a sanctuary of safety and comfort. That is, until eerie stories began circulating among friends and neighbors, painting a very different picture. It started casually enough, during Alex's daily trips to the local dog park. The park was a lively gathering place where neighbors bonded over their pets. But one day, the tone shifted dramatically. Conversations turned from playful banter to whispered accounts of bizarre incidents happening in backyards throughout the area. Some spoke of shadowy figures darting through their yards at night, while others described finding inexplicable messes, like human waste or mutilated animals, left behind as ominous calling cards. One man recounted how his normally fearless dog had cowered and barked at something invisible, refusing to go outside after dark. These unsettling tales planted seeds of paranoia in Alex's mind. That night, Alex shared the stories with their mother, who revealed her own observations of sketchy individuals loitering in the area. While initially dismissing the stories as exaggerated, Alex couldn't shake a sense of unease, especially as more neighbors corroborated the bizarre happenings. Weeks later, the situation escalated. On a crisp December evening, Alex was absorbed in their usual late-night gaming session when their phone vibrated. It was their sister, frantically urging them to come downstairs. Alarmed, Alex rushed down to find their sister, dog, and cats all fixated on the backyard. The dog's fur bristled as it barked in the direction of the trees lining the yard. The cats crouched low, their eyes wide and unblinking. Through the glass, Alex's sister described seeing a tall, shadowy figure standing motionless in the backyard, its gaze locked on the house. Grabbing a baseball bat, Alex joined their sister in watching the darkness, straining to discern any movement. The figure was gone, but the oppressive feeling of being watched lingered. The two siblings stood vigil for half an hour, the tension thick and suffocating. When the backyard remained silent, they finally allowed themselves to exhale, but the incident left Alex with an unshakable dread. For days after, Alex and their family remained on edge, double-checking locks and peering cautiously out windows at the slightest noise. Despite their efforts to rationalize the incident, the thought of an intruder, whether human or something else, haunted them. Even now, the neighborhood retains an air of mystery, its shadows seeming to hold secrets that none dare confront directly. The once peaceful dog park gatherings now carry an undercurrent of fear, a shared acknowledgement that the safety they once took for granted might be nothing more than an illusion. It was a chilly winter evening, the kind that Alex loved for the fresh, cool air and the cozy quiet it brought. The windows in their room were open to invite in the crisp breeze, offering a small reprieve from the warmth of the house. The night seemed unremarkable until a single, haunting moment shattered the peace. At around 1 a.m., Alex had just settled into bed after a relaxing shower. The only light in the room came from the glow of the moon outside. As they turned off the lamp, the window across from their bed darkened unnaturally, as if something had blocked the light. Alex froze, a cold shiver running down their spine. Peering closer, they saw it, a face pressed against the window screen. The features were obscured by the darkness, but one thing was clear: the eyes. They bore into Alex's soul with an intensity that felt almost inhuman. A distorted grin stretched across the figure's face, its expression both mocking and menacing. The face seemed to be covered in fur-like hair, blending into the shadows, giving it an otherworldly quality. Time seemed to stop as Alex's mind raced. Was it a prank? An intruder? Or something far worse? Summoning their courage, Alex edged closer to the window, heart pounding so loudly they thought it might echo through the room. As they neared, the figure didn't flinch or move. It remained eerily still, as if daring Alex to come closer. In a panic, Alex bolted out of the room, their breath ragged and their minds swimming with fear. They ran down the narrow hallway to find their two nannies, who were at the other end of the house watching TV. Stumbling over words, Alex frantically described the face they had seen, but the nannies dismissed it as the product of an overactive imagination. Reluctantly, Alex convinced them to investigate. When they returned to the room, the face was gone. The screen was undisturbed, and there was no trace of anyone outside. The nanny seemed vindicated, but Alex felt no comfort. They knew what they had seen, and the image of that sinister grin was burned into their mind. For days afterward, Alex refused to sleep in their room, haunted by the thought of the figure returning. The feeling of being watched lingered long after the incident, as if the visitor's gaze had left an invisible mark. The open windows, once a source of joy, now remained tightly shut, a barrier against whatever, or whoever, had invaded Alex's sanctuary that night. Years later, the memory remains vivid. Alex still questions what they saw that night. Was it a man? A hallucination? Or something from beyond the veil of reality? One thing is certain: that face at the window was not of this world, and its intentions were anything but innocent. As time passed, the events of these unsettling stories faded into memory for those who experienced them, yet the scars they left behind remained vivid. Each tale, whether it involved a shadow in the forest, the sound of footsteps in the attic, or the piercing gaze of an unknown visitor, seemed to share a common thread: the unknown, and the human fear of what lies beyond comprehension. For Alex, the face at the window became a lingering ghost in their mind, a reminder that not all questions have answers. For others, like those who lived with the sounds of footsteps above or the stolen moments with the supernatural, life moved forward, but with an ever-present awareness of what might be lurking just out of sight. Each of these stories begs the same chilling question: are we truly alone? Whether it's the paranoia of being watched, the eerie coincidence of a chilling event, or the inexplicable moments that defy logic, These experiences challenge our perception of reality. They force us to consider that there might be more to our world than meets the eye, and that sometimes, the monsters we fear might not be imaginary after all. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the unknown. At Phantom Files, we strive to bring you stories that make your heart race and your imagination run wild. Whether you're here for the chills or the curiosity, your support means the world to us. If you've made it this far, consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. It's our goal to reach 250,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and with your help, we can uncover even more terrifying tales to share with you. Have you experienced something unexplainable? We'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and remember, the scariest things are often the ones we can't see. See you soon on Phantom Files.